didn't expect a family crest to completely change how I see history, but it did. Because this one object sent me into a story about wars, kings being chosen and removed, erased nations, and people who shaped history without ever sitting on a throne. And the wildest part is that it didn't start with a castle. It started when my dad came back from England. My last name is Dudley. Like a lot of families in England, it's a pretty common name. We knew that there was a Dudley family crest. You see, they're everywhere, but most of the time they're just symbolic, decorative, something people hang on a wall or never question or made up in the first place. But years ago, my dad went back to England and he brought home our family crest. An old Dudley crest, and this thing felt different. It was heavy, worn, like it'd been lived, it'd been somewhere and it was from somewhere. So instead of just hanging it up and calling it history, we sent it away to be checked. And when it came back, that's when everything started to unravel. Because it wasn't just real, it was verified. Connected to very old English houses, the kind of families that don't usually show up in school textbooks, but absolutely shaped the direction of history. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just a symbol, it was a trail. And once you see a trail like that, you kind of have to follow it. So I took a genealogy test, okay? And you can get them anywhere and you can order them. And here's the simplest way to understand how this works. Your DNA isn't a list of names, it's more like a map. Tiny little blood markers that tend to stay inside families for hundreds of years. Not because anyone is special, but because families stay connected, even when history doesn't record them properly. It's like following breadcrumbs through time, but it's like following blood markers. And when I followed those blood markers, the trail stopped somewhere very specific. The road stopped at Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, better known as the Kingmaker. Now, here's the important part. I'm not directly related to the Kingmaker himself. I don't have his blood markers. I have the bloodline that runs through his children. But even stopping there was enough to completely blow my mind because of who he was and what he did. Because Richard Neville didn't start as Earl of Warwick. He inherited the title of Earl of Salisbury first, but he married into the Warwick title. And that mattered because suddenly he controlled both Salisbury and Warwick. That combination made him the single most powerful person in England in the 13th century who wasn't a king, which that was up for debate in the first place. But he was instrumental in the deposition of two kings. Yes, two. That's why history calls him the Kingmaker. And he did it during the Wars of the Roses, which I'm sure you've heard of. His position was so important that whichever side he supported won. He was the tipping point, not the crown, not the throne itself, but him. He decided. And learning that completely rewired how I thought about history. But here's where it gets even crazier. Because while I wasn't directly descended from the Kingmaker himself, the bloodline ran through his wife. And when I followed her lineage, I started questioning, who's her father? And that's when I found something even more incredible. Her father was Richard de Beauchamp, the Earl of Warwick, before Neville married into the title. And Richard de Beauchamp wasn't just important, he was also absolutely extraordinary. He was a military leader, a diplomat, a power broker. He played a role in the suppression of the Welsh identity, Wales in itself, the country, its kings, not just through war, but through just the complete erasure of the Welsh language, Welsh culture, and memory. And let's stop here because I do not support that. But then there's this. He was also involved in the trial of Joan of Arc, the legend, the saint, the real political trial where power, fear, and faith collided and permanently altered spiritual history as we know it. Richard de Beauchamp was connected to this. I was connected to this through his blood markers. I was blown away. At this point, I was honestly just like frothing at the mouth. It was incredible. because suddenly my bloodline was connected to choosing kings, influencing wars, erasing cultures, which I'm not proud of, and shaping spiritual history. And none of it happened on the throne. It all happened just beside it, forgotten for many a century. So for the last 2 years, I've been digging, documenting, I'm looking at maps and letters and histories that barely got mentioned at all. And slowly, a story started framing in my mind. A story based on truth, based on history, based on what happens to people who survive power instead of wield it. And that became a book. And I've been working on that for like 2 years. And that book eventually became this channel because now I'm obsessed with hidden power. Because I'm tired of hearing only of kings and queens and seeing YouTube videos of things I've seen before. The real story was happening behind them, underneath them, beside them, advisors, strategists, fixers, the people history didn't bother to preserve properly. Those are the people who actually shaped the world. And that's what this channel is about. Hidden power exists to uncover those stories and share them with you. Because once you start looking, you realize every family, every nation, every moment has hidden power beneath the surface. And I am on a mission to find as many of those stories as I can and reveal them right here. And eventually, my real strategy is to try and make movies about the most incredible, hidden and forgotten stories of our world.